Ambil tebu di tepi rumah, digenggam bersama akar. Ilmu sedikit jika berhikmah, garam selaut menjadi tawar. Padi seikat kepuk di hulu, sirih di hilir jemur di taman. Kepalang diri menuntut ilmu, pasir sebutir jadikan intan.
Kemana hendak mencari lada? Ke hujung kebun sebelah timur. Jika hendak mencari bahagia, di dalam hati mesti bersyukur.
Samaraika, hendak kenal orang berbangsa. Samaraika, lihat pada budi bahasa. Samaraika, hendak kenal orang berilmu. Samaraika,
bertanya belajar tidaklah jemu.
Padi seikat kepuk di hulu, sirih di hilir jemur di taman. Kepalang diri menuntut ilmu, pasir sebutir jadikan intan.
Tumbuh melatasi pohon labu, anak Melayu memakai samping. Banyak harta miskin ilmu, ibarat rumah tidak berdinding.
Malam cahaya berkunang-kunang, bagai bulan jatuh ke riba. Orang rajin pastikan menang, orang tekun akan berjaya. Hendak kenal orang berbangsa, lihat pada budi bahasa. Hendak kenal orang berilmu, bertanya belajar tidaklah jemu.
Padi seikat kepuk di hulu, sirih di hilir jemur di taman. Kepalang diri menuntut ilmu, pasir sebutir jadikan intan. Terbang lebah di hujung pedang, hinggap di dahan membuat sarang. Terbang lebah di hujung pedang, hinggap di dahan membuat sarang. Banyak sudah dapat dipandang, ilmu akan dijual. Kaya ilmu akan dijual.
Kaya ilmu akan dijual.
Hendak kenal orang berbangsa, lihat pada budi bahasa. Hendak kenal orang berilmu, bertanya belajar tidaklah jemu.
Padi seikat kepuk di hulu, sirih di hilir jemur di taman. Kepalang diri menuntut ilmu, pasir sebutir jadikan intan.
Tok, bagaimana nak jadi orang berjaya?
Berakhlak mulia, rajin dan bersyukur.
Terima kasih, Tok.
Terbang lebah di ujung pedang, hinggap di dahan membuat sarang. Terbang lebah di ujung pedang, hinggap di dahan membuat sarang. Banyak sudah dapat dipandang, ilmu akan dijual. Banyak sudah dapat dipandang, ilmu akan dijual. Ilmu akan dijual. Samaraika. hendak mencari lada ke hujung kebun sebelah timur. Jika hendak mencari bahagia di dalam hati, mesti bersyukur.
Ambil tebu di tepi rumah, digenggam bersama akar. Ilmu sedikit jika berhikmah, garam selaut menjadi tawar. Padi seikat keput di hulu, sirih di hilir jemur di taman. Kepalang diri menuntut ilmu, pasir sebutir jadikan intan.
Kemana hendak mencari lada? Ke hujung kebun sebelah timur. Jika hendak mencari bahagia, di dalam hati mesti bersyukur.
Hendak kenal orang berbangsa,
Lihat pada budi bahasa.
hendak kenal orang berilmu.
Bertanya belajar tidaklah jemu.
Padi seikat keput di hulu, sirih di hilir jemur di taman. Kepalang diri menuntut ilmu, pasir sebutir jadikan intan.
Tumbuh melatasi pohon labu, anak Melayu memakai samping. Banyak harta miskin ilmu,
Ibarat rumah tidak berdinding.
Malam cahaya berkunang-kunang, bagai bulan jatuh ke riba. Orang rajin pastikan menang, orang tekun akan berjaya.
Hendak kenal orang berbangsa, lihat pada budi bahasa. Hendak kenal orang berilmu, bertanya belajar tidaklah jemu.
Padi seikat keput di hulu, sirih di hilir jemur di taman. Kepalang diri menuntut ilmu, pasir sebutir jadikan intan. Terbang lebah di hujung pedang, hinggap di dahan membuat sarang. Banyak sudah dapat dipandang, kaya ilmu akan dijual.
Akan dijual.
Hendak kenal orang berbangsa, lihat pada budi bahasa. Hendak kenal orang berilmu, bertanya belajar tidaklah jemu.
Padi seikat keput di hulu, sirih di hilir jemur di taman. Kepalang diri menuntut ilmu, pasir sebutir jadikan intan.
Sobat mulia, rajin dan bersyukur.
Terima kasih, Tok.
Terbang-lebang di ujung benang hingga tidak membuat sarang. Terbang-lebang di ujung benang hingga tidak membuat sarang. Banyak sudah dapat dipandang, ilmu akan dijulang. Banyak sudah dapat dipandang, ilmu akan dijulang. Ilmu akan dijulang. Kemana hendak mencari lada? Ke hujung kebun sebelah timur. Jika hendak mencari bahagia, di dalam hati mesti bersyukur.
Ambil tebu di tepi rumah, digenggam bersama akar. Ilmu sedikit jika berhikmah, garam selaut menjadi tawar. Padi seikat kepuk di hulu, sirih di hilir jemur di taman. Kepalang diri menuntut ilmu, pasir sebutir jadikan intan.
Kemana hendak mencari lada? Ke hujung kebun sebelah timur. Jika hendak mencari bahagia, di dalam hati mesti bersyukur.
Hendak kenal orang berbangsa,
Lihat pada budi bahasa.
hendak kenal orang berilmu.
Bertanya belajar tidaklah jemu.
Padi seikat kepuk di hulu, sirih di hilir jemur di taman. Kepalang diri menuntut ilmu, pasir sebutir jadikan intan.
Tumbuh melatasi pohon labu, anak Melayu memakai samping. Banyak harta miskin ilmu,
Ibarat rumah tidak berdinding.
Malam cahaya berkunang-kunang, bagai bulan jatuh ke riba. Orang rajin pastikan menang, orang tekun akan berjaya.
Hendak kenal orang berbangsa, lihat pada budi bahasa. Hendak kenal orang berilmu, bertanya belajar tidaklah jemu.
Padi seikat kepuk di hulu, sirih di hilir jemur di taman. Kepalang diri menuntut ilmu, pasir sebutir jadikan intan. Terbang lebah di hujung pedang hingga di dahan membuat sarang. Terbang di hujung pedang hingga di dahan membuat sarang. Banyak sudah dapat dipandang, kaya ilmu akan dijulang.
Hendak kenal orang berbangsa, lihat pada budi bahasa. Hendak kenal orang berilmu, bertanya belajar tidaklah jemu.
Padi seikat keput di hulu, sirih di hilir, jemu di taman. Kepalang diri menuntut ilmu, pasir sebutir jadikan intan.
Tok, bagaimana nak jadi orang berjaya?
Berakhlak mulia, rajin dan bersyukur.
Terima kasih, Tok.
Terbang lebah di ujung pedang hingga di dahan membuat sarang. Terbang lebah di ujung pedang hingga di dahan membuat sarang. Banyak sudah dapat dipandang, ilmu akan dijulang. Banyak sudah dapat dipandang, ilmu akan dijulang. Ilmu akan dijulang. Kemana hendak mencari lada? Ke hujung kebun sebelah timur. Jika hendak mencari bahagia, di dalam hati mesti bersyukur.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining in to this event. I've been updated on the large number of participants who have registered for this event. It's very good to hear so many young people interested in today's dialogue. Let me introduce myself. I'm Dr. Muhammad Shamsuri Johari. I'm a research fellow with the Institute of Policy Studies here at NUS. I'll be your MC for today. Just a few reminders for housekeeping. The housekeeping rules for today's dialogue is as such. For those who are familiar with the way IPS organizes its events, you'll know that we nearly always follow Chatham House rules. So this is to ensure that an intellectual yet robust discussion takes place. So this means that participants are free to use the information received, but neither the identity nor the affiliation of the speakers, nor for that matter any other participant may be revealed. Now, for those of you on YouTube, if you would like to ask questions during the panel discussion later, do remember to log into your YouTube account first, yeah? Right, let's begin proper. Assalamualaikum. On behalf of the organizing committee, welcome to the MENDAKI-IPS Policy Dialogue 2020. Once again, a warm welcome to our guest of honor, Dr. Muhammad Maliki Osman. And thank you, sir, for taking time to be with us this afternoon. I know you just from Parliament. This is the second year that this policy dialogue is being organized together by MENDAKI and IPS. Last year, we discussed on the theme of educating our Malay Muslim youth for the future. For this year's dialogue, and in light with the developments brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic, we'll be discussing on the topic of developing a resilient community through lifelong learning. The dialogue today will highlight why there's a need for all of us to develop a lifelong learning mindset, which is critical to achieving success in today's fast-changing global economy. So today, we have three speakers. We have Dr. Hana Al-Haddad, we have Ms. Farida Saad, and we have Mr. Muhammad Irshad, who will be giving their insights on the topic. Now, as a reminder, speakers will be given a maximum of 10 minutes for their presentations. And then after all the sharings, we'll have Minister Maliki joining the presenters in a panel discussion. And it'll be moderated by Mr. Muhammad Faisal Aman, who is Senior Manager in the Research and Planning Department at Yayasan Mendaki. But before we begin with the presentations, may we invite our guest of honor, Mr. Minister Maliki Osman, to say a few words as his opening address for this event. Minister, please. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Shamsuri. Good afternoon, distinguished guests, distinguished panel speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon and Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Well, thank you so much for having me this afternoon at this policy dialogue. Looking forward to having a good discussion with everyone. I'm really heartened to see so many of you in this virtual policy dialogue. And as mentioned by Shamsuri, this is the second time that MENDAKI has been organizing this. So I would like to congratulate Yayasan MENDAKI and the Institute of Policy Studies, IPS, for organizing this policy dialogue. Platforms such as these are very important and indeed necessary for us to be aware of the latest developments and policies, especially those that impact our community. So these platforms also serve as avenues for us to share ideas and perspectives on issues most pertinent to our community. And many who are listening in right now, I understand, are also community leaders. So to this topic, developing a resilient community through lifelong learning is really very apt, especially in today's context. And I'm sure everybody knows what we are referring to. Just like communities everywhere, our community too has had to seek creative ways to adapt to disruptions and changes brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic has forced us to search for strengths within us to respond to a crisis, an unprecedented crisis at that, to rethink the way we live, the way we learn, the way we work, especially and as well as how we can embrace technology at a pace much faster than we had earlier prepared for. And many of us would probably realize that in the last 6 months. Learning and relearning is now the norm as we brace ourselves and prepare for a volatile future. One that will continue to be challenging, yet full of opportunities. Lifelong learning has always been one of the focus areas at the Ministry of Education, and we've articulated this for some time now. We not only prepare our students to be work ready when they leave school, but also to be work relevant through their adult working life. And it's very apt that we're talking about lifelong learning. That is, they have the skills that make them valued by their employers at different points in time in their career. As such, MOE has been ramping up our capacity and resources to encourage Singaporeans to pursue lifelong learning. This includes increasing the number of career guidance officers starting next year to better support our students in planning their transition from school to work to even higher education. Institutes of Higher Learning, or IHLs, are also partnering many of our industry partners, organizing career fairs and going online to reach out to our students who are entering the workforce. And this is a critical part of preparing them. At the same time, we also want Singaporeans to also try new things and learn new skills by making use of their skills future credit. And all of us, I'm sure, have our credit still in place, for which a top-up of $500 was announced earlier this year. And we can talk about how many of us have actually used our skills future credit. Additionally, we have also provided support made available to our mature workers, with mid-career workers aged 40 to 60 years old receiving an additional $500 skills future credit known as the mid-career support, which can be used on selected reskilling programs at the Continual Education Training Centers or CET centers. And most of these courses are very heavily subsidized by the government. Since its introduction, the Skills Future Credit introduction, about 83,000 members of the Malay community have used their Skills Future Credit. This is about 24%, or about 1 in 4 have used their Skills Future Credit, and mostly taking courses in areas such as food and beverages, information and communications, and security and investigation. Very good areas that will provide opportunities for them in looking at new job opportunities in the current and future economy. To ensure our individuals continue to upskill and reskill, our IHLs, Institute of Technical Education or ITEs, polytechnics, and our autonomous universities have developed industry-relevant courses in areas such as data analytics, finance, and cybersecurity as part of the continuing education training or CET efforts. I encourage our Malay Muslim youth and workers to explore and take advantage of these and other initiatives that we have put in place. And at the same time, build your capabilities to enhance your resilience and relevance in the changing work landscape. Towards this end, I would like to applaud Yayasan Mendaki for pushing the message of the importance of lifelong learning through its Raikan Ilmu or Celebrate Knowledge campaign that it's been happening for several years now already. This year's Raikan Ilmu's theme, Embracing Learning Through and Strengthen Resilience, is indeed very fitting and a timely reminder to all of us on the importance of adopting a lifelong learner mindset, which is being open to change, being willing to unlearn and relearn, and able to adapt to the needs of an ever-changing environment. So making upgrading and upskilling affordable is only one part of the equation. We try to do that, and we have been doing that. But at the same time, I think we will need to ensure that the environment is equally supportive. That is, employers, family members, the community must also play a part. As adults, we also know that it's really not easy to work and study at the same time. And those of us who have done it know the challenges. We can do more as a community to provide such supportive environment for our lifelong learners to be part of the communities and make sure that lifelong learning is part of our community's DNA and make us a more resilient community in the future. And I hope we can talk about that in today's discussion. I look forward to the sharing by the three speakers and to hear from all the participants on board, to hear your thoughts and ideas on how we can develop a resilient community through lifelong learning. So with that, thank you very much, and I look forward to an exciting discussion with everyone. Assalamualaikum.
Thank you, Minister. Wise words to live by. So earlier this month, we met up with some youths to seek their views on identity, resilience, and lifelong learning. Now, to put our minds in the right perspective for the discussion ahead, let's watch what they have to say. So let's have the video, please.
All right, stand by, roll cam. Roll sound. Roll. Stand by, roll cam. Roll sound. Roll. And action. And action.
Sometimes not understanding what I was learning. Sometimes not understanding what I was because I was financially independent.
My little brother here is actually autistic. Sometimes I just want to punch the wall just handling him, right?
Some of the challenges that I face as a student is being organized.
Having no background in whatever that I was studying, it was just very challenging, and as well as having more faith in myself when I get my assignments done.
To do well in school, and also to make sure that my parents are always proud of me, and also time management as well.
My mom is no longer with me, which is she passed away about a year ago. Ever since she left, I have to work after school to support myself, my brother and my niece.
Basically, I try to have a strong support circle outside of school.
I study easier outside of my home, so at times I go out to McDonald's to properly focus on my revision.
So basically, when a problem happens, I detach myself emotionally so as to tackle them, categorize what I can do, what is in my control, what is not in my control, tackle what I can, and what I can't, I will have to seek for help.
My role model is actually Steve Jobs.
Definitely my mother.
My dad.
My own friend.
My mom.
The reason why she is my role model is because she has a really beautiful character, and I try to be closer to her so I can learn her ways so that I can be a better human.
I myself also want to actually be an innovator in the future.
She's never given up on her career. Throughout the 20 or so years that she's been a teacher, she's been really passionate in what she does, and that's why she's my biggest role model.
It's a mentality, and it's a gift that you get from overcoming a lot of challenges.
Even though there are 1,000 reasons or 1 million reasons for you to give up, you actually find that one reason to continue doing your best in whatever you do.
Basically, to bounce back from any hard situation you go through. And when you bounce back, you improve as a person.
As a student is to always push through every single doubt that has been thrown at you. Keep up to what you think is best for yourself. Go against all these doubts, yeah.
It's a pursuit of academic knowledge that one has instilled since young that will actually help him in the future.
It helps us to think further ahead for the future, so we are very well prepared to overcome what's coming.
Lifelong learning will enable one to rise up to a challenge and learn what we can, like new and in-demand skills to meet the expectations or meet whatever we need in the workforce currently.
Studies is a golden opportunity for us to gain better understanding and knowledge, even though we are just young teenagers or even working adults.
It doesn't matter which stage of work or life you are in,
you should never stop learning. Investing in yourself stimulates your creativity.
Lifelong learning is essential if we are going to be a generation of people who are going to be happy and successful even till our old age. Yours is more interesting.
Never do well. Okay. Basically, the Malays have always been associated with never doing well. You're not good at math, and it's a stigma that I think we should really phase out of. But yeah, I'm glad that individuals like me and some of my friends were coming out to show that we can do math.
I want to serve the Malay Muslim community in the future. That's kind of like my aspiration. So that's the first thing that came to mind.
The Muslim community is just, we rely on God too much sometimes. So it may be seen as lazy, but it's not.
I think religion also plays a part and actually tells us to be patient and be accepting. Some people will actually look it from a negative side. They also have a drive. It's more of like maybe some setbacks, some adversities in life, but I'm sure eventually they will bounce back and strive for the greater good.
When we get the opportunity given by others, our friends or even families, we get to strengthen our connections with others, professionals, so for us to get a better and suitable jobs.
What comes to mind is job opportunities. So it voices back down to employability. When you are employed, you gain experiences, you also meet new people and foster new friendships.
If you really think about it, the people who do have access to the most opportunities are people who do have privilege. Yeah.
Because of connections, let's say from your past internships or from your part-time jobs, you're able to garner different pools to go to, and then you are able to increase your employability and therefore garner more experience.
Right. Those are very interesting perspectives. We'd certainly like to hear from all of you and your views as well later on. But before we open up to the floor, let's now hear from our speakers. Let me first introduce our first speaker, Dr. Hana Al-Haddad. Dr. Hana is an adjunct research fellow from the Institute of Policy Studies. She has extensive international experience working with vulnerable groups, using the arts as a tool for positive change and conflict transformation. Her projects include working with populations affected by ethnic conflict and the tsunami in Sri Lanka, with Aboriginal communities in Queensland, and that's supported by Access Arts Australia, and in a UNESCO-supported project with young people involved in gang conflict in Brazil. Her current works include exploring issues such as inequality, poverty, racism, and their impact on educational experiences in Singapore. She's also currently involved in the development of the MSF Community Work Practice Guide in an advisory capacity. So Dr. Hana will share her insights on the topic, how educational practices can promote resilience and provide positive pathways from childhood to adulthood. Hana, please.
Thank you, Dr. Shamsuri. And thank you, Minister, and thank you, MENDAKI and IPS for having me here. So I'll be, just to check if my audio is okay, yeah?
Yes, fine.
Okay, fine. I'll be speaking today about how educational practices can promote resilience and provide positive pathways from childhood to adulthood. I only have about 10 minutes or so I'll draw just from a couple of practices and just touch the surface. And each slide could potentially be a series of workshops on its own, actually. So let's begin with the first slide. Let me begin with resilience. Next slide, please. So resilience. Resilience is the ability to withstand, adapt, recover, or grow in response to trauma, adversity, or stress, right? So it involves behaviors, thoughts, actions that can be learned and developed in anyone at any stage of learning and life. Resilience is a skill that can be built and honed over time. Resilience has many faces, it's multidimensional, and it looks different in different people. And so is trauma. Trauma has many faces too. Trauma can be acute, for example, resulting from a single stressful, dangerous event. It could be chronic, resulting from repeated or prolonged exposure to highly stressful events, or complex, resulting from multiple different traumatic events. Now, what does trauma look like? What can trauma look like in a classroom? So in a classroom, it can look like a student who may appear withdrawn or even shy or overly sensitive. The student facing anxiety. It could be a student who's distracted, thinking about something else that could be happening outside of school, at home, for example. It could be a student on a short fuse, being aggressive, appearing aggressive to the teacher. Or it could be a student who has language deficits or executive function deficits, for example, having trouble planning, organizing, or solving problems. Okay, so why trauma-informed practices? So trauma-informed practices has been found to cultivate lasting resilience, right? How it attempts to recognize these many faces and risk factors such as hardships, peer victimization, bullying, even violence and racism. And from racism, I mean from microaggressions that you face every day, the everyday racism, to even explicit, implicit, systemic racism. Okay, but recognizing these factors does not mean we focus on the deficits. Rather, trauma-informed practices means that we meet the student's trauma with a strength-based approach. Right? So Bessel van der Kolk, in his influential book on trauma called The Body Keeps Score, right? He calls for schools to not only be seen as academic centers, but also as places where children are truly seen and known, and where they can learn self-regulation, resilience strategies, and where they can develop a sense of self-agency. So at their best, he writes, schools can function as islands of safety in a chaotic, uncertain world, right? Which is a world we basically live in right now. And for students to thrive and be their best selves. So how do we create these islands of safety, right? So first we need to create a safe space. We need to establish predictability, build connected relationships, right? This helps create a sense of trust. We need to model power with, not power over relationships. For example, like giving students choices. We need to build social, emotional resiliency skills. We'll talk about this later on. And to stay in the resiliency zone, which can be attained through a whole child restorative practice. And again, I'll speak a little bit about this later on. So when done right, trauma-informed practices can cultivate lasting resilience and success. Now let's talk about relationships. Next slide, please. All right, so the quality of your relationships influences how resilient you can be. Right? Relationships are very important in building resilience. There are many ways to build strong, positive relationships, and I'll discuss a few ways today here. The first is to hold the space for each other, right? Holding space can look and mean different things to different people, again, but I find it's defined beautifully by Heather Platt at Uplift. Uplift is a global media channel that aims to inspire positive change around the world. Anyway, she says, what does it mean to hold space for someone? She says, holding space for someone means that we are walking alongside another person in whatever journey they're on without judging them, without making them feel inadequate, without trying to fix them, or trying to impact the outcome. All right, so when we hold space for the other person, we open our hearts, offer unconditional support, and let go of judgment and control. Sometimes we find ourselves holding space for people while they hold space for others. It's virtually impossible to be a strong space holder unless we have others who will hold the space for us. Yeah? So even the strongest leaders sometimes need to know that there are some people with whom they can be vulnerable and weak without fear of being judged. So therefore, why do I say this? Therefore, holding space is not just for students, but for teachers too. Yeah. So teachers too need the emotional support, or educators, principals, anyone. They need the support and space so that they can be effective advocates for students. Yeah. So we need to take the time out of our busy schedules to do just that. So second, I say mind your language. In building and drawing on the strengths of the students using our strength-based approach, the language we use is very important. Our words matter. Language holds power. Yeah? And the way we communicate with the child, the words we use, how we use them, the tone that we use, it can all make a lasting difference in the way the child sees himself or herself. Okay. Stigmatizing language perpetuates negative perceptions, and trauma-sensitive language means no labels, no judgment, and this is very important, no jargon, because jargon makes someone feels that, oh, they don't know something, yeah, when it's unnecessary. And so not only is it important for teachers to model positive language, but students should also be practicing it on a daily basis, and having students reflect on their language to identify words that have negative connotations will allow them to become more aware of the impact of their language on themselves and on others. This also ties in with building empathy and also perspective taking, which we will talk about in a bit. The third is to encourage student voice and choice. This is to do with the power with strategy rather than power over. Yeah? And how do we do that? First, we allow students to make decisions regarding what they learn or how the classroom should look like, feel, or run, right? So it shows the students you respect them and that their thoughts and ideas are valuable. Second, when students make decisions with their peers and teachers, they feel that they are part of a community and that they have contributed something important. So this way, they get more emotionally invested and are more likely to hold themselves accountable, to follow through with any class obligations that they have. Third is to encourage students to make their own choices, as it gives them a sense of purpose. So I'm sure we will all agree that the goal of education should be to empower students to pursue their own interests and further their own knowledge. So when students are able to make choices about their education, they are empowered to explore issues that they find important and meaningful. And this, they can continue this work ethic throughout their lives. Yeah. So relationship building is important, and it's also part of social emotional learning, which we will talk about next. Next slide, please. So social emotional skills, this I know has been happening quite a bit in Singapore, the SEL, social emotional learning. So SEL can build resiliency, especially during these uncertain times, right? And there are 5 main competent areas of competence in developing social emotional skills. The first one is self-awareness, which involves identifying emotions and accurate self-perceptions. Regular self-reflection can help you identify feelings of discomfort and find ways through them without bottling it up. Yeah, too much, and seek help. Self-management includes managing stress and controlling impulses, which includes aspects of your executive function. This may include setting, maintaining boundaries. There's social awareness, which entails perspective taking and empathy, appreciation for diversity as well. This is a very important skill needed to build a community of care. Okay. And then relationship skills. We've established that the quality of relationships influences how resilient you can be, right? So strong, positive relationships can help you get through tough and challenging times. Responsible decision-making focuses on skills like identifying problems, evaluating, reflecting, and acting with consideration for the well-being of others. Yeah. So the concept of ethical decision-making and responsibility is closely tied to the other components. For example, to do the right thing by standing up to friends who are mistreating others, a student needs to be in touch with their own values, so awareness. They also need to empathize with those affected, social awareness, and resist peer pressure to join in, so relationship skills. Okay, I'm running out of time, so I'm going to skip to the next slide and my final slide, restorative practice. So this is a whole school approach, which means it considers relationships, interconnections in and out of school, right? It's based on the foundation of social connectedness, respect, safety, and communication. Restorative practice commits to building a culture of care in schools that can be carried over to the communities, all right? And the aim is to build, maintain, and restore relationships and doing right by others, right? There are 9 interconnected parts here. so this is more of the whole is larger than the sum of the parts. Okay, it leads to the well-being of the student. And this framework, the restorative practice framework, provides a piece-by-piece guide to cultivating caring and healthy communities in which a child can thrive and build and strengthen their resilience. All right. So if I can just summarize, as you can see here, the elements within the different practices we've glanced quickly over today overlap with one another. Right. So commonly, these practices cultivate and enhance lasting resilience. This talk has been about the what and to some extent the how of educational practices. But if I may, and if I try to talk very quickly, I'd like to quickly talk about the why. Okay, why trauma-informed practice? Why restorative practice? Well, unfortunately, the experience of trauma and hardships is not uncommon, okay, in Singapore or around the world, especially in these times, and especially among those who experience hardships, inequity, and inequality, in some form of which were alluded to in the video that we just saw just now. So developing strong support systems are central to one's resilience, right? Arming yourself with skills that build strong resilience could help you be more resourceful in overcoming these risk factors. But at the same time, it is important that we don't allow this narrative around building resilience to obscure the wider causes of inequities that needs to be addressed, right? But good news is that these educational practices not only build lasting resilience, which is good, it could also integrate social justice education as an initial step forward in addressing issues such as inequality, these hardships people face, and also foster inclusivity. Right. So as we advocate for positive pathways for our children to resiliently forge through, we look to these educational practices to build, maintain, restore a community of care and support, and for an inclusive and equitable future that we and all our children deserve. Thank you and stay safe. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Hannah. I do find this presentation interesting in the way it tells us of how important it is for schools to put up the right initiatives to develop students' social emotional resilience. But it also complements two keywords which I've always repeated based on my research, and that's the need for consolidation and integration of resources and services to create positive outcomes for our students. Hannah talked about support systems, which is very true. So it does hearten me to see initiatives today like M-Cube framework, our SG Teguh Bersatu or SG United, that's now happening. Hopefully, Minister Maliki can elaborate on this later on during the Q&A session later, yeah? But we go on to our next presenter. So our next presenter is Ms. Farida Saad. Ms. Farida is Deputy Director of Enterprise Singapore, where she helms a team to spearhead Singapore as a leading urban agriculture and aquaculture technologies hub, contributing to food security, economic growth, and good jobs for Singaporeans. She is also president of Mendaki Club, which is a volunteer-run non-profit that supports the career aspirations of Malay Muslim youths and professionals. So let us now call upon Ms. Farida, who will be sharing tips on how to COVID-proof your career by tapping on available opportunities. Farida, please go ahead.
Thanks so much. Salam semua. It's such a privilege to be invited by Mendaki and IPS to be part of this policy dialogue. I hope that you guys can see my slides. Before I actually go into the topic of my presentation today, I wanted to share a bit of my own personal career journey and sort of draw lessons for our Malay Muslim youth who are in attendance to date. So a bit about myself, I grew up listening, in the 90s to the likes of your DJs in 987 FM, and I was so bent on going to poly and studying to become a DJ. And then I realized that actually DJs, majority of their time actually spend doing other things like hosting and being on TV as opposed to actually playing music. So I tossed that dream aside, and then I did an internship with SPH, and I thought for sure that, okay, I'm going to be a journalist, and then I asked around the reporters there, okay, what should I study? And they said, okay, you just go to university and then you study things like political science or international relations, and then you can come back. And then I did that, and within my first semester, it was 2008, and I think most of you may remember it was a financial crisis. It was a global financial crisis, and then suddenly I got very worried, as I'm sure some of you are now. What if my parents were to lose their jobs? What would happen to my university education? So I made a very practical decision, and I went for the first scholarship that I saw, which was then with an agency called International Enterprise Singapore. And I mean, a lot of people said, "Oh, congratulations, you're a public scholar," and I didn't know what that meant. All I knew was that, okay, someone else is going to foot the bill for my studies, and I've got a job, right? Because at that time, similar to now, we actually don't know when the economic downturn is going to last. So that was me. I went from a DJ to the accidental public servant. And as a public servant, I got the opportunity to live in one of the most dangerous cities on earth. It's actually Johannesburg, South Africa. I was posted there in 2015. So the irony of this picture is that actually the lions were the last that you had to worry about when you're in South Africa. And it turned out to be a very enriching, very humbling experience, both professionally and personally. And one of the biggest takeaways that I took is simply never take for granted one of the greatest freedoms that you enjoy here in Singapore, which is never having to think twice about walking down the street at any time of the day for fear that someone might rob you or someone might smash and grab your car while you're waiting at a traffic light. Today, I'm very proud of to be a team lead for a bunch of 20-somethings, and we're all very passionate about food security and food resilience. So I lead the agri-tech team here in Enterprise Singapore, and every day we talk about fish, vegetables, or eggs, which is how to grow more, how to make them nutritious, and how to sell them in supermarkets at affordable prices. Oh, and I happen to be president of Mendaki Club, which is a tribe by itself. We're about 200 plus volunteers, and all of us share this fundamental belief in supporting our Malay Muslim youths like you guys to actually achieve your career aspirations, but also to give back to the community. So this is my favorite job, which actually isn't a job because I don't get paid for it, and that's fine. So at every juncture that you are at, for some of you, you're just, graduating, or some of you are in your mid-career, but ask yourself, why do you do what you do? So why do I do what I do? I went from being the accidental public servant to the committed public servant because the public sector creed, which are the values that you see on your screen, integrity, service, excellence, happens to be the values that resonate with me. My passion, I didn't go out there finding my passion found me. And it took a while, but that's where I'm at, and maybe some of you are in the same boat. Another important thing is, I think, in the video that you saw, there's something really incredible about the Malay Muslim community, which is this idea about volunteering. And I think we're all just trying to do our best and do our part to live up to this ideal of a community of success, right? And there are many multiple pathways to success. So the point is this, which is each of you, Malay Muslim youth, whatever your background is, you hold within you the key to actually uplifting the entire community. If you first empower yourself, and by doing that is by believing in your ability to influence positive change and to put thought into action. So that's the start thing. I think we'll go into the presentation proper, which is really what I want to talk about is COVID-19 and what it has done to the jobs and economic sector in Singapore. So the not so good news is that you are among maybe about 48,000 or so fresh job seekers who are leaving school and are beginning, your career. So this is the grim reality that you are entering into. So as Mendaki Club, what we did was that we actually brought together a dynamic group of panelists from both public and private sector to answer three very fundamental questions, which is what you guys will want to know, which is where are the jobs, who's hiring, what skills will get me hired and stay hired, and then the third is actually what resources are available to me. So some of you may have caught our conversation, but lucky you, IPS had invited me to come and sort of share some of the key takeaways, which is really what I'll do. So the first and most important thing is when you're asking yourself, where are the jobs? Well, when was the last time you picked up the newspaper or watched CNA or listened into the radio? So there's a lot of news, in terms of the opportunities that are out there. So do pay attention, right? Where are these 33,000 job vacancies? They're actually across 10 different industries, from banking to finance to government to education. So again, in sustainability, for example, an area that I'm at, there are now new jobs that are up and coming in things like QC, in agro-technopreneurship, in aquaculture, etc. So I think you just have to keep your eyes peeled and actually watch the news and see, where some of these opportunities are at. Use LinkedIn, and I don't just mean have a LinkedIn profile. So LinkedIn is beyond just a job platform. They've actually got a lot of data. So do log on and see what are some of the labor market trends for you to actually find out who are some of the top employers that are hiring. So Shopee being one, I'm sure you've heard that they're hiring more than 500 graduates and mid-career more recently. What kind of jobs are top trending? Of course, no surprise there. Most of them are in the digital space. And then, of course, I wanted to introduce Wantedly, if you have not heard of them. Since COVID, they started this really incredible platform on their website, which is a 24/7 live update of the kind of jobs that are actually available for you to have a look at. So the point is where are the jobs? Well, what does the data tell you? And then more importantly is that when you are job hunting, adopt flexibility in your job hunt, be prepared to perhaps take a lower salary or explore alternative employment arrangements. And of course, you need to adapt to labor market changes. If work from home is going to be the new norm, then you simply have to understand yourself and how you can succeed in the workplace based on that. So the second is, on skills. And I think Dr. Maliki mentioned about things like Skills Future and the like. But I mean, maybe if you're sitting there wondering, well, okay, I mean, what should I be upskilling myself or reskilling myself in? I think it has to be a mixture of both your soft skills as well as your hard skills. And you can see here, COVID or no COVID, the soft skills pretty much remain the same, right? It's creativity, it's problem solving, it's emotional intelligence, etc. But do pay attention to the hard skills as well. I wanted to touch on also, I think, for some of you that may have or are currently in certain sectors that are considered at risk or sunset sectors like retail or otherwise, I think that it's important for you to also see what would be some of the common skills that you can transfer over. So retail being one, I think some of you who are in accommodation or tourism and in food services as well. So there are definitely skills that you can transfer to other emerging sectors. I think the technical and digital skills, in the past, it was a premium, but today it's actually a prerequisite. So perhaps digital skills, something for you guys to think about as youths, is this idea that it's actually going to be something that is the norm as opposed to just simply being something that's in addition to that. Soft skills, like I mentioned. To summarize this part, I think sharpen transferable skills, especially soft skills, acquire trending hard skills like digital skills, like I mentioned, and more importantly, get out there and network if you can. So my last point is actually what sort of resources are available to me, national level, community level. I wanted to just take some time, and I think for some of you that are interested in maybe pursuing a career in public sector leadership, just a big shout out. Mendaki Club is doing our Rework Career Conversation on public sector leadership. Scan the QR code in front of you to find out more. We'd be happy to hear from you. Also, a couple of other platforms for you to take a look at. I think Talented being one. You actually can see what kind of skill sets that, let me just go back quickly, what are kind of skill sets and personality traits would be things that you could actually have and then actually put in your CV. A couple more other online resources. Do check them out when you can. And so my last point is this, which is that you are the driver of your career, right? What you can do is actually adopt a resilient mindset. You simply have to adapt to this post-pandemic world. And last but not least, just acquire new skills, both a combination of soft as well as hard skills. So that's it from me. Any questions, we can take it during the panel.
Right. Thank you, Farida. One keyword that came to me when Farida was talking is that phrase, self-empowerment. Because this is, for me, this is what I hear her saying. Empower yourselves to take charge of your future. And self-empowerment here means taking up the initiative to get the right kind of information on the right kind of jobs that's in demand and the right kind of industry that's looking for manpower and expertise, and not to go through motion and not to let nature take its course. When I was doing a lot of this discussion with the Malay members of the Malay community, I see the older generation talking a lot about redha, about letting things come what may, about God's will. But then again, when I talk to the younger generation, I do get a different kind of signal from them. I get the message that they feel that the future is up to them. and that their self-effort counts. So that's actually very good to hear. Okay, we go on to our final presenter for today, Mr. Mohammad Irshad. So Mr. Irshad is Head of Corporate Affairs for the ASEAN region at Tata Consultancy Service, a global leader in IT services, consulting, and business solutions. Irshad is also the founder and president of Roses of Peace, an interfaith non-profit organization that seeks to build a harmonious, cohesive, and resilient Singapore. The unique programs of ROP have united the hearts of people across different faiths, race, and cultural traditions by building bridges, deepening understanding, and strengthening trust. Giving his insights from the perspective of an employer, Irshad will share on how we can encourage youths and professionals to find relevance in today's changing employment landscape. So over to you, Irshad.
Thank you so much, Dr. Johari. Dr. Shams, I really appreciate MENDAKI and IPS for having me here and for sharing the panel with other distinguished speakers, and to Dr. Maliki for really setting the context and overview at the beginning of the session. In my presentation, it's not as fun and jovial as the earlier speaker, Farida, but I try to keep it as more to the point and helping our youth navigate the uncertain future ahead. And really, the time that I was given is 10 minutes, which is not enough to cover the the content that I've put in the slides. But I think let me touch on the broad points, and then during the question and answer, if anyone of you have questions, we can delve deeper into each of the individual points. The overview, I think, as you see from the the topic, I'll touch briefly on the changing employment landscape currently, the employers' perspectives. What are we looking out for? What are the employers want from a hire that they're going to people that they're going to interview and people they're going to hire to the company, and how do you find your relevance in this whole maze that's that's possibly ahead of you? So in that aspect, I'm firstly going to touch on changing employer landscape and employment in the new normal, as alluded to by Farida earlier. It has changed completely. How HR practices are being practiced, how people are adapting to the new normal, as we call it now. And when I say new normal, we're also talking about digital first. And essentially, we are used to things like design thinking, but now everybody is now focused on digital thinking. How can you reinvent how work is being done and put digital and technology at the heart of how we do work and how we interact with each other? So I think that's very important. And beyond just the digital first approach, I think we also have to reimagine how we do work, and the nature of work is obviously going to change fundamentally. And to that end, I feel that as you saw in the recent survey done and published in Straits Times, 8 in 10 Singaporeans would like to have flexi work arrangements. They want to work from home, etc. So I think moving on, businesses are also looking at how they can downsize their office space, their footprint, the physical footprint, and at the same time allow more of their officers and their people in their company to work from home, work offsite, have split team arrangements. And this kind of flexible work arrangement is going to be possibly the new norm in the years ahead. How can we adapt, and how can we then skill ourselves and train ourselves to have that necessary skill sets to be agile, to be nimble, and these things I'll cover later on. But flexi work arrangement is the way to go, and I think it's going to be a crucial part of the changing employment landscape moving on. I think many of you are familiar with the gig economy, but what's interesting is that the trend is many youngsters, many millennials, Gen Z, etc. They're very interested, and many of them have already started to move into the gig economy, and that's also going to be something of a new normal as well moving on. And formal employment really is important, and many of us prefer formal employment. A stable career, stable job progression, etc. But I think the gig economy is something that we have to contend with, and to see how we can also help our youth who are in the gig economy to upskill, to find new ways that they can adapt to the new normal and find relevance in the changing employment landscape. What we also have, lastly, in this category is rapid disruption that I want to touch on. Every single industry is being disrupted, be it digital disruption, be it somewhat of a technical disruption, etc. But every industry, from education, from healthcare, from technology, from the way transportation is being conducted. So it's all being rapidly disrupted. And we, as people who are seeking employment or find employment, we have to contend with the fact that our jobs today may not be relevant maybe 5 years or 10 years down the road. So how can we continuously keep up with the learning, reskilling ourselves and re-equip ourselves with the relevant knowledge, and to really embrace lifelong learning as the theme for today's webinar. And we have to live with this changing employment landscape. My second sort of broad area that I want to touch on is employer perspective. So as an employer, what is it that we're looking out for? What is it that we want? I think first and foremost is the attitude and drive. I saw the video earlier that was shared, that was played, with the youth sharing about their perspective, etc. And I think, they're all having a very positive mindset. It's very important. And don't let perceptions of others set you back. I think that means that you're holding yourself back. So have a very positive attitude, have the drive and the gumption to go against conventional norms and to really hold your ground in whichever area of expertise that you want to specialize in. So employees look out for attitude and drive first and foremost. That's my view. And I think second thing is the skills and competency. So you really have to embrace lifelong learning. You have to keep up with the relevant skill sets and competency framework along the way as you progress in your career. And even as you start out, even while you're in university, etc., pick up skill sets which may be of use to you. So if you are perhaps doing a humanity course, pick up skill sets on additional skill sets, or maybe you might pick up some programming skills on Python, HTML, etc. I think we have to have that sort of complementing skills and competency in addition to your own areas of specialization moving on in the future. And this is what I meant earlier. You need the agility and nimbleness. So this first landscape I mentioned is that the last one was disruption. In a landscape which is constantly being disrupted, you need to have the agility and nimbleness to pivot to a new area of growth, to pivot to, seize an opportunity that's probably presenting in front of you. And number 4 is mobility and adaptability. Employer perspective, we want people who are able to be mobile, people who are able to just, travel, to go to places, to get things done, and who are able to adapt to the changing nature of work. And I think this is very important because we can't be just resting on our laurels and be happy to be just in Singapore and not be able to travel and, maybe say, yes, obviously with our families, we have our roots in Singapore, but we increasingly have to develop a mobile workforce. And mobility can be within Singapore, can be within the sectors, cross sectors, and can be also regionally as well, regionally and globally. And that is very important to, to be sort of mobile. And this will really enhance your value proposition in any company that you join in future. And last but not least, I think experience and exposure, like what Farida said, in your university, after you graduate and later on, pick up, go to internships, build your networks, which I'll touch on later, and build that sort of experience in the relevant areas of expertise, be it a traineeship program that you have recently joined, the SGNAT traineeship programs as a fresh graduate, or whichever areas, you want to do a part-time job, etc. Every experience counts. There's no such thing as a bad work experience. Every experience counts. Every exposure counts. So if you can go for leadership programs, if you go for, conferences organized by Mendaki Club, go for conferences organized by Mendaki, these are all exposure. It builds your network. It builds the sort of exposure that you have, and go out of your comfort zone. So beyond just Mendaki, with the other professional communities, go and network with them, go and, sort of seize opportunities that may be present to you. On to my last category, which is finding relevance. How do you find relevance? Like I said earlier, start networking. I think networking is absolutely important. Myself, I come from a business school background from Singapore University. And in SMU, a lot of emphasis is placed on networking from the onset, from year one. And I think, I would really encourage all the youth out there to go network, build a professional identity. I don't have to touch on this. It's already covered by Farida. And pick up a side hustle. This is something interesting. In many of the sort of leaders in the industries that I've come across, they always had something on the side, outside their main work that they always do, something they're passionate about, something that drives them, that sort of helps them take away the pressure from their work, and then to sort of, have a side hustle. If you can cope, good. If not, just pick up some skills. That's what I'm meant to share. Leverage MOOCs, I think covered earlier as well. Massive online open courses. There are lots of online courses, Coursera, on LinkedIn, Lydia. There's lots of materials online where you can pick up new skills, and from the comfort of your home and your laptop, you can learn and get certified. Last but not least, as a concluding point, have mentors. I think finding a good mentor is half the journey covered. So I think having a mentor is absolutely important. With that, thank you for the opportunity to share my views and thoughts, and over to the moderator.
Right. Thank you, Irshad. I know you've held yourself back from talking a lot more because of the lack of time. And I know same with the rest of the panelists here today. But I think Irshad's presentation is an excellent follow-up to what Farida had been talking about just now. That ultimately you, my dear friends out there, you have to go on your own and not so much having to be pushed. You have to take the step forward to decide on your own career paths and to maximize your own potential. I'm writing on a chapter of social capital right now, and I totally agree with what Irshad talks about on the need to establish connections. I mean, connections is basically an essence towards raising your own personal social capital. Making the right connections places you in a better position to get to the right places. But there's another thing that isn't talked so much about in the social capital literature, and that's about making the right connections, providing the individual with a higher sense of self-worth. People talk about guilty by association, but there's also such a thing as pride by association, by being and knowing the right people. And that leads to personal drive and motivation. So ladies and gentlemen, we hope the sharings have given you plenty to think about, because we now would like to hear from you. Now allow me to pass on the baton to the moderator for the panel session, the Q&A session, Mr. Faisal Aman, who's Senior Manager for Research and Planning at Yayasan Mendaki. So over to you, Faisal.
Thank you, Dr. Samsuri. Assalamu alaikum, and good afternoon, everyone. Faisal here from the Research and Planning Department. So today's policy dialogue focuses on pressing issues that face our Malay Muslim youths and young professionals in this COVID world. Just to share some context here, this year alone, we have 48,500 graduates entering the workforce from various tertiary institutions in Singapore. So interestingly, MOM's job situation report just recently released in October indicated that less than a third of the opportunities were filled up under the SG United Jobs and Skills package. So what does it mean? It means that there are still unfilled vacancies. And MOM has also stated that there is perhaps a mismatch in expectations and skills. So my question is whether Malay Muslim youths are well prepared to take up these opportunities to be more resilient. So before I do that, I would like to invite the guest of honor, Dr. Muhammad Maliki Osman, Minister in the Prime Minister's Office, and Second Minister, Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Ministry of Education. Warm welcome, Minister.
Thank you very much, Faisal.
Minister, based on the video clip and presentations that you have heard earlier, in your opinion, what is the Malay Muslims youth's preparedness to take up all these opportunities?
Well, thank you very much for the question, and thank you so much to the speakers for a very enlightening set of presentations. I think the video showed the excellent and extreme enthusiasm amongst young people and the understanding of the context of which they're growing up in and where they are heading, acknowledging challenges that they face, at the same time ready to take on those challenges. And I think I'm very heartened to hear such enthusiasm. The reality is we know it is not an easy world, nor the future that they're heading into, very different from the future that I entered when I was their age. But certainly we will be here to present to them the necessary infrastructure that will be supportive of them getting into the space that they're going into. So, for example, I'm very I was heartened to hear Dr. Hannah spoke about the various opportunities that we can create in the education sphere. And being in the Ministry of Education, I'm very sure that educators don't disagree with the areas that she has highlighted. And in fact, we are reviewing and always looking at how best we can create an education system that does prepare our students for the future. The challenge really is that the future is changing so fast now. So by the time our kids get into primary one at 7 years old, and we think that preparing them for 10 years of education will get them to somewhere, by the time they're in 4th year already, you see a lot of changes in the environment. And then by the time they get to 10th year, there's another set of challenges that come in. So that's really how we ought to continue to ready ourselves, not just the hard skills that the speaker spoke about, but really the ability to adapt and the ability to acquire those soft skills very early in life too. But we also do not want to overwhelm our kids because we really do want them to explore their own strengths, explore their own capabilities. And that's why, just very quickly, we all know that in MOE, we've put in new systems in place to take away some of the pressures of PSLE scoring. Even in secondary schools, we are going into subject-based banding, looking at strengths that each student has. And I think more fundamentally, I also would like to send this message to our students, our youth out there. The reality is that we do not have to think that our trajectory is one that is linear. And the more we think that it's linear, meaning that you have to go to secondary school, O-level, A-level, or poly, university, and you start working only when you get to after you get to university. I think the more we think of a linear trajectory, the more difficult it is, I think, for them to be able to get into the new space and the new future, because in the new future is really where you find relevance, as Isha has mentioned earlier. And that's where part of the things that we are trying to promote really is this whole idea of work-based, what we call it, work-study programs, where you get into the work and realize the kind of skill set that you also need to enhance your relevance to the company they are in, and you can continue to do so. And that's really the fundamental principle behind lifelong learning, where you do not stop learning. Just very quickly, Faisal, if I may, in the background, you see Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I've always been asked what is, by many of our foreign visitors, what's unique about Singapore? What is the key success factor of Singapore? I tell them 3 things very simply. We are always works in progress. We've never stopped reinventing ourselves, and we always must find our relevance in the world because we are a small country. And I think that's a simple message to our young people also. Believe that you're always works in progress. You're never at end point. And we must always reinvent ourselves, and reinventing ourselves meaning that you need to acquire skills at a different point in time. At the same time, being relevant to the people, to the companies, to the networks that you're connected with. Thanks.
Thank you, Minister. I think I do believe and I agree with what you are saying, and I feel that we have some ground sentiments that support your observation. Just to share with the panelists as well, a survey of 200 youths aged between 15 to 35 was conducted last month by MENDAKI towards lifelong learning, and this poll suggests that around 91% or 9 in 10 agree that the skills upgrading will actually help them find a better job. So we see that it's this high level of willingness here, especially for those below 35. And it seems also that this segment is prepared to take up these opportunities. But perhaps one question is, how does this sense of willingness translate into action, right? Perhaps that question could be answered later by our panelists, especially from Farida and Irshad. So before we do that, a gentle reminder to our YouTube viewers to log in their accounts and to share the questions. And while we wait for that, I would like to also now focus to our one of participants actually, Ms. Nisa, who is a junior college student. Nisa, are you here with us?
Yes, I am.
Hi, Nisa.
All right. Very good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Nisa, and I come from Anglo-Chinese Junior College. And I have one question, and primarily it is for Dr. Hannah. So I would like to ask, what are your views in the differences of perception of setbacks between children and parents due to the intergenerational gap? And to simplify my question, I'd like to give a scenario where I think many youths like me would have probably faced. So I've heard from many of my friends that when they have a problem and they try to seek help from adults, such as their parents, many a times their parents would brush it off and say, oh, I faced situations far worse than you, or you shouldn't be stressed about a small thing like this. And the worst part is that they will say this isn't that big of a deal. So isn't this in a sense undermining the problems of youth now? And how does this affect the resilience of youth and what should be done to solve this issue? Yeah, thank you.
Such
Sorry.
eloquent question. Okay, go ahead, Hannah.
Yes, thank you for the very important question as well about the intergenerational gap, about how our parents, a lot of parents actually say that, in my time, you had to work hard. For you guys, all you have to do is just go to school and study. It's so easy. You still want to complain so much, and all that. But yeah, I mean, what if I may answer this in two ways? Okay, first is in general. I would say every generation of youth, children and youth, they are shaped by the social, political, economic events of the day, right? Different historic events. So today's youth are no different. So each of us, we grow up in different times, facing different versions of problems, right? Even schools are managed differently now. Like for me, for my son, who has been in a few trouble in his time, what he has to do is sit down and write reflection letter, right? For my time, if I was a boy and I did the same thing that he did, definitely I'll be on stage, kena cane already. It's a different story, different time. But with that, I would say, what I would do, what my view is, if I were to face that situation, is first I need to hold space. Like I said, build relationships. Communication is key. Relationship is key. Hold the space. Have some take perspectives of ourselves and of our parents, right? For example, our parents may not grow up. They didn't grow up in digital times and may not fully appreciate the impact of technology or social media has on a person, even as multiple studies have found like a strong link between heavy social media use and increased risk for depression, anxiety, loneliness, self-harm, even suicidal thoughts, right? But for parents, some of them say, just turn it off, just stop doing, they don't fully appreciate the brevity of it. And also now there seems to be a general perception, right, that today's youth are softer, always complaining. There's the strawberry generation. Then after that, there's the durian generation or something like that. But then studies have actually shown that today's Gen Zs tend to be less entitled, more realistic than earlier generations, right? They're ready to work hard, but they want to work fair, right? They are inclusive, they're concerned about social justice, and they're increasingly more diverse, less partisan, which means they may eventually insist on more cooperative, more egalitarian system, right? And social media will most likely play a role in that revolution if it doesn't sink our youths into anxiety and depression first. So we need to, so going back to communication and strong relationships, right? What would I do if I were to face the differences? First is I always, I use a lot of this. This is in mediation skills. And I learned this from way back when I was in the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, where we learned a few mediation negotiation skills from Harvard. And I find myself even now using this in my everyday communication, right? And one that I use a lot is called the golden questions. And the golden questions that mediators always ask is always these three. What is your greatest concern? So what's my greatest concern? What do I most want to see happen? And what do I want the other person to understand? Okay, so I ask these three questions a lot. So every time when I faced with a problem, or if you face a problem with your parents, then I think we need to take the initiative to ask ourselves these three questions. So for example, what is my greatest concern? My greatest concern is that my problems and my feelings are being downplayed, is dismissed, is invalidated, right? So what do I most want to see happen? What I most want to see happen is fairness, for you to understand, for me to be heard fairly, right? And so what do I most want the other person to understand? Perhaps is to see that my feelings are valid, even though my problems you may not fully appreciate or understand my problems, but this is how I feel. And if you have that basis or foundation of that relationship, they would, I mean, I'm sure your parents would want to, would be concerned about how you feel, right? So even if the problems I face may seem less. So I think we can access our critical thinking skills, we take a step back and we ask ourselves the golden questions. Does that help, Nisa?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Hannah, for that response. I think this is something similar to what we have found in our poll again, below the age of 35. So we found out that youth choose their friends as their first source, family as the second, and such information such as careers and also relationships. So parents' advice and response, I think it's very important to them. And family members should therefore be also well informed, right? Updated and supportive in the way they relate and engage their children. So we have a few questions online, and I want to quickly link this to one from Mr. Fazli Mansour. Regards to the growth of online learning platforms, do we see employers, both public and private sector, putting less emphasis on paper qualifications in place of online achievements? Okay, so it's paper qualifications versus online achievements. Perhaps I could ask our two panelists, Farida and Irshad, to chime in.
Irshad, you want to go first?
Sure. I think what's interesting is that at least in the sector that I come from, the technology sector, you had Google coming out to announce that they're going to replace the sort of qualifications, not replace. They're also going to roll out their own qualifications from Google that sort of replaces what they're looking for from a person that they're hiring. And these are all digital skill sets. And in fact, digital skill sets that you acquire are constantly and rapidly changing. So as much as you have a degree from a university of repute, as much as you have a diploma that you graduate with, what you learn during that 4 years or 3 years gives you the grounding and the foundation. But beyond that, you constantly have to upgrade yourself to keep relevant with the changing nature of technology. And I think not just in the technology sector, but also in any sector that requires skills and competency. This is something that you have to constantly upgrade and sort of upskill, and hence the notion of lifelong learning comes to play. So putting less emphasis on paper qualification, I think paper qualification is still important to sort of put a foot into the door. But beyond that, how do you excel in that relevant field that you have taken up? You need to also upskill and sort of get other competencies and frameworks.
So maybe I'll share on the public sector. Actually, it's such a great panel, right? Because we've got a mix of academia, public and private sector. So I think for the public sector, for a while now, we've really been looking at diversifying the kind of scholars and the kind of leaders that we're bringing into the public service, just because we have to respond to the kind of complex world order that we're in. And so I think first and foremost, the idea of paper qualifications and also sort of maybe the biasness to maybe certain institutions versus others, I think that there's a movement away from that. And I think at the end of the day is the candidates that we would look for have to bring that well-roundedness and that holistic skill set. I think that's one very important thing for the public sector. The second is actually, I hold the view that online education has made it in fact more accessible for us to gain certain types of paper qualifications that we would not have been able to do so. So I'll give you an example, right? So Get Smarter, for example, today offers executive programs and degree programs from places like Oxford and Cambridge and MIT and all these other areas. So in fact, actually, even for your basic, sort of qualifications and when you're upskilling, when you're talking about MBA and masters and otherwise, I think those are in fact avenues that we could tap on, which wouldn't have been possible, the last couple of years before sort of the advent of online platforms. And then I think the third and last point is actually, at the end of the day, it's also this idea of hard skill, soft skill, right? Would I, as someone who is in a position to hire, when I'm evaluating two candidates, one has a certificate that says I have completed a course on critical thinking and judgment versus someone who actually displays critical thinking and judgment during the interview process, then to me, I'm going to hire the candidate that is actually able to show application as opposed to someone that, sort of just has a cert. So I think that's another important point to take note of.
Thank you, Farida, for that very good response and a very in-depth reply to compare the difference between qualifications online and paper qualifications. This is a real dilemma that our workers face outside. One quick question by Kazira Kamaluddin. What would members advise on the community, especially mid-career switchers who are resistant to the idea of lifelong learning and upskilling? So there is a segment who think that they do not need, or they think that it is not relevant to them. Perhaps we can ask Ishaq or Dr. Maliki or any other panelists.
Maybe just a quick response to that. I think it is understandable for mid-careerists to have a certain level of anxiety when we ask them to upgrade, because certainly, I mean, looking at me and my age, those who are under 45, 50, we came from a generation where upgrading wasn't the operative word, because we were trained in a certain manner, and we think that the job is an iron rice bowl that will stay forever. And so we were not readying ourselves for such a world, and yet we are stuck in this environment where we've been asked to keep upgrading. So it's understandable that they're anxious. I think what's necessary really is to walk the journey with them and to take steps where they can see success, where they can see value in upgrading themselves in a certain manner. That's where I think the collective effort of all is important. Not just the person himself, but the employers, looking at how employers can harness that environment. That's really where our skills, for example, the skills SG United mid-career pathway is, where we work together with employers to create and design training programs that makes it more achievable from the perspective of mid-careerist person. At the same time, we also need to look at the community, and community needs to be able to harness their own strengths in supporting mid-careerists to move into new spaces. The SG Teguh Bersatu framework is where we have different stakeholders coming together to create that conducive environment for our mid-careerists to get into that space. So for all the mid-careerists out there, you are not alone. I think if we see that strength in numbers, all of us are in the same space where we want to move into spaces where opportunities are available, I'm very sure they would be able to move into that space. Basically, it's just to normalize the behavior. And when we talk about lifelong learning, why not we normalize this as a journey that is not just for our young people out there, but also for their parents, and that they see that it is part and parcel of, and that's why I talked about the DNA earlier. If we can make this as part of our DNA, I think we'll go far in ensuring that our community tap on those opportunities that's available.
Yeah, Faisal, if I can just chime in as well into what Dr. Maliki mentioned, is since I'm from the technology sector, let me just share, to the madam who asked the good question, is there's something called the company-led training program. It's a CLT program, they call it. And it's a structured program under the TESA Skills Accelerator, Tech Skills Accelerator, TESA, an initiative that in fact that aims to accelerate professional development for fresh and mid-career professionals through on-the-job training that is aligned to the skills framework for ICT sector. So I think perhaps, madam, if you're interested in the technology side, you can look up IMDA's website. They've got a whole range of programs for you to join and take up as well. And if you would excuse myself, I just have another program that I need to join. Madam Halima is a GOH, so I just need to welcome her. So thank you so much again to Mendaki and IPS for having me here, and to the distinguished panelists who have joined, and to our dear guest of honor, Dr. Muhammad Maliki Osman. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Irshad. Maybe to just do a rejoiner in terms of the industries. I think not only we want them to move, we want them to move into the growth sectors. So based on our poll recently, again, we see that IT and banking comes in as fourth and fifth favorite. And of course, education and public sectors came in the top two sectors. That is not surprising. Or this is compared to the Comprehensive General Household Survey in 2015, where again, education and public sector remains the traditional choices. So we want them to move as well, but in terms of growth sectors. And I think that is something that we have to work towards, and we need the structures and the support. Right. So, Ms. Farida, would you want to share again anything that the initiatives done by MENDAKI Club?
No, thanks so much, Faisal. Maybe just to chime in on that earlier question about mid-career, right? And I think, yes, mid-career, that's quite a wide age gap, right? I could be 35 and that's also considered mid-career. And actually, I think in the public sector, there's an openness, and right now we are also, different agencies are also hiring what we term as sort of senior associates or as senior business advisors. And I think it's that belief that there's so much experience and that wealth of expertise needs to actually be nurtured and be actually pushed into areas where they can feel that they are valued. And then another point is, I think family support is really important. It's actually it's critical, right? And I think that if you're in a position where it's your parents, or it's an uncle and auntie, or and even an older sibling or otherwise, it's a really difficult time for them, right? And that anxiety, I think you can express empathy and you can express encouragement to actually nudge them along the way and say, it's okay, it's difficult, and support them however way that you can. So I think a big shout out on what MENDAKI Club is doing. Again, I talked a little bit about our career conversation series. The last one that's coming up is super apt. We've always known that the public service and the public sector has been a key career, a growth career and an emerging career industry for a lot of our Muslim youth. So we're doing a session on the 31st of October. Happy to share more details to the various attendees. I think what we're looking at, or what the message that we want to push out there, is that Muslim youths, you can pursue a career in public sector leadership, either as scholars or as leaders themselves. And I think we welcome that diversity to actually join the public service, and we'd be more than happy to welcome you guys.
Thank you, Farida. Maybe one last thoughts by our Minister. Perhaps, Minister, could you share with us your thoughts on the progress of the Malay Muslim community, especially our youth, and whether they are well prepared to take up these opportunities?
Sorry, I didn't realize that my mic was off. Let me just say that again. Thank you so much, Faisal and Dr. Hana, Farida, Shamsuri, and earlier Irshad, for coming together on this very important panel. So Faisal's question, whether our youth are ready, I have no doubt that they are. I am very, very optimistic, not just based on what I've heard today, but from the many young people who I've come across in many dialogue sessions, in many opportunities where I met with them. They're very enthusiastic. They have a lot of creativity. They have a lot of energy. I think, but one key thing that I think they need to work on really is what has been repeated many times by Farida and also Irshad earlier. It's about the networks. And I think in the new world, really, you need to establish those networks. And I think the community can do its part also to provide opportunities for networking. I mean, MENDAKI Club is one excellent example. Don't be shy to the young people out there. You have what it takes to do well. I assure you, from the government's perspective, we are doing our part in creating the infrastructure I spoke about earlier to create opportunities and to recognize the strengths of every student out there. The way we've structured and continue to review our education system is where we want to ensure that young people feel that they are valued as individuals. I think the point that Dr. Hana mentioned earlier in an education system where everybody is an individual with value and has to be valued, and we will value them. And we put in lots of support system, even for those children from lower income backgrounds, children who are faced with very challenging circumstances. This uplift program that is being developed, and we harness the resources within the community to be able to support them. So I think, just to very quickly sum up, to the young people out there, I think it's really the ball is in your court, where you can step forward, network, and take the opportunities that is presented to you. But remember that the endpoint must not just be a university degree in and of itself, but it's really the skill set that's relevant for you in a field that you're very passionate about. And I think if you stand guided by some of these key principles that's been highlighted by the panelists earlier, I'm very sure, inshallah, all of you will do well in the near future and many, many years down the road. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Maliki. Thank you. We'd just like to summarize today's discussion, and we can see that the Malay community is actually willing to take up opportunities, as what Dr. Maliki has mentioned. But we also want to look at how they need to seek credible sources of information and understand the employer's needs and landscape. I think that's very important. Absolutely. And to plug oneself in networks and find mentors and learn from them to navigate this unfamiliar terrain. I think that's all from me. I think we have not enough time, unfortunately. So just again, thank you to all our panelists and for their candid discussion and views. Over to you, Dr. Samsuri.
Thank you, Faisal. Thank you all. Right. Networks, establishing, promoting networks. That'll be my mantra for my future research endeavors. Okay, right. We've come to the end of today's dialogue. Thank you, everyone, for your contributions. I want to place on record our thanks to Minister Maliki for sharing his time to grace this event. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you very much.
Well, before we end today's dialogue, do take note of the upcoming programs and workshops by Mendaki's Future Ready Department and Mendaki's SENS, which may be of interest to you as part of this year's Raikan Ilmu Month. Now, at the same time, we would appreciate if you can provide feedback about today's event via the QR code or the web link. To our participants on YouTube, thank you for joining us. We hope the sharing that's taken place has given each of us a better understanding of the ways to make our futures brighter during these uncertain times. Right? Are we just us on Zoom now?